Welcome back to another episode of Mustang Mowers. This is probably going to be a video series on this little front tine tiller. What this is a Lazy Boy model T9. Now, I had never heard of Lazy Boy tillers before this. This is a guy that I work with, dropped this off to me several years ago, as he had taken it to a small engine shop and was trying to get it running. The carburetor and the fuel tank were trash, so they told him it's not worth fixing. So he brought it to me, and it's been sitting in this condition for about the last 4 or 5 years. Now, if you notice, the carburetor and the fuel tank are both missing. My thought, and this was my mistake, my thought was, well, if both the carburetor and the fuel tank are trash, I'll just get rid of them, and then I'll buy some aftermarket parts for it, and everything will be fine, then I'll have a tiller. Well, my mistake was those carburetors are actually pretty cheap to get aftermarket, but those tanks are not. This is the style that has the carburetor that's mounted to the tank, like the video I did on the Montgomery Ward Edger. So it sat like this for a long time, and you can see it's actually pretty simple design. Belt drive runs this pulley here, and then it's chain driven in here down to operate the tines. So, like I said, it's been sitting like this for quite a long time. I don't know anything about the tiller. I don't know anything about the engine or any of that. All I knew was it was going to be very expensive to replace the tank specifically, but the tank and the carburetor. So, in the estate sale that I went to where I picked up the tiller, I also managed to grab one of these. So, in this video series, I think the first video, I don't know how many videos this is going to be, but in the first video, I'm going to tear this engine completely apart. I'm going to pull the head off of it, pull the carburetor off of it, pull the tank off of it. I'm not okay with this straight pipe exhaust, so we'll fix that problem. I'm going to pull the front cover off the flywheel, and we're going to see what the valves look like and what the piston looks like. If the piston wall is scored a little bit, I have a hone. We're going to hone that out. I'll pull this back cover off, pull the crankshaft out, and get everything in here cleaned up, refreshed, and put back together so that we can put this on the tiller, hopefully in time for me to till up my garden this year. So let me get everything set up, and I'll bring you guys back in when we start the teardown process. Okay, so before we get into the actual teardown of this engine, I want to see kind of how this engine is performing right now. That way, once we get through freshening this up, we can kind of see what difference it makes, if any, after we do our work. So, kind of like we went through in the Edger video, we're going to do the same thing with this. So, first thing I'm going to do is pull this spark plug out. It was already finger tight when I got it. Kind of look down into the combustion chamber, and this engine is different in that, so your carburetor is here, your exhaust is here, your intake valve sits just right in here, and your exhaust valve sits just right in here. So the piston is actually offset just a little bit over in this area, and that they call this an L head or a flathead. So if we start to kind of work it just a little bit, you can see the piston in there moving, and it's moving pretty free, which is a good sign. This rewind starter clutch is a bit sticky. When we get into the teardown process, we'll tear that apart and get it cleaned out real good as well so that it functions properly. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of this Marvel Mystery Oil that we use a lot of. I'm going to put a little bit down in here and try to get it on top of that piston so that we can have a little bit of lubrication in there as we're starting to spin this over, because I don't know how long this engine has sat, and I don't know what condition it's in at all anyway. So just to make sure that everything goes as smooth as possible, I'm going to put a little bit of this Marvel Mystery Oil down in there. Now, it doesn't take very much. Like, this is literally all I'm going to put down in there. But because this piston is offset over here, I have to try to kind of shoot it back that direction to get it on top of the piston. So I'm going to try to get it to where the piston is down towards the bottom before I shoot this in there. So here we go. Alright, so we'll let that sit just a second while we go through the rest of our process here. So the tank actually doesn't look bad. I can see a little bit of rust spot down in the bottom, but this tank actually looks really good. So choke on this is working just like it should. Throttle linkage isn't stuck. That's good. Check this governor gear down here. Governor gear is not even attached, but it's moving freely, so that's a plus. All right. So, like I said just a minute ago, right behind this rewind starter is the starter clutch right here. And so there's ball bearings on the inside of that when you pull on it, centrifugal force pushes those ball bearings out and it grabs the actual starter, rewind starter, and it engages the crankshaft so that the engine will spin over to start. Those get gummed up periodically, so when we pull all of this off, we'll clean that up. That way it's working just like it should. So now that Marvel Mystery Oil has sat a little bit, I'm going to rotate this around a few times just to kind of make sure that oil gets in there lubed real good on the cylinder. And I'm actually looking for valves to be moving. I can see the intake valve moving. The exhaust valve is too far back in there. I can't see it. But seems to be functioning just like it should. So let's do a leak down compression test on it and see what kind of compression we're getting out of this as it sits. Helps if I had the right adapter. There we go. Get that screwed in there good. Put our gauge on it. All right, let's see what we got here. So we're looking at about just shy of 50 psi, which is probably going to be a bit low. But after we get in here and kind of see what's going on, we're gonna pull the valves out and we're gonna relap the valves. Hopefully that gives us a better seal so that we get better compression. But we'll know more once we get this head off. So let me get to a position where we're ready to start taking stuff off, and then I'll bring you back in. Okay, so we got the carburetor and the fuel tank off. It was pretty simple. It's 2 bolts that go through, one on the top side of this, one on the bottom side of this, right into the side of the engine itself, and then there's one in the bottom that holds down on this bottom plate right next to the oil drain. So both of those, all 3 of those come out, and then the tank and everything comes off after you unhook this breather tube. So this breather tube, like we talked about in the Edger video, goes right into the valve cover so that it pulses the pulse pump inside this carburetor to draw fuel up and make fuel readily available when the engine needs it. So we've got that off now. Set this off to the side. And then The next thing I want to do is try to get this straight pipe exhaust out here. So, God, these pipe wrenches are probably older than I am. There we go. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that straight pipe exhaust stuff. It's too loud for me. So, now that we've got that off, let's pull this front cover off. Should be... should be 3 7/16 bolts. One right here. Then you've got one right here. And one right here. After that, this front cover should come right off. Okay. As you can see, more dirt daubers. And while I had the camera off, I checked to see if we had spark, and we did not. We'll try to adjust that problem here in just a minute. Oh, I think I know exactly what the problem is. There's the kill wire. Okay. So you can kind of hear those ball bearings inside this rewind starter. But, all right. All right, so let's get this heat shield off of here, and then we'll get the head popped off of it. Figure out what size this is. It's that one, 1/4 inch. Try to keep my stuff as organized as possible so that when I go to start putting stuff back together, I don't have to try to hunt and find stuff. All right, so let's get this head pulled off. I wonder if these are 7/16 also. Where'd my socket go? Oh, here it is. There's a snake that bit me. Nope, it's bigger than 7/16. 1/2 inch. Okay. All right. So, as you can see, these valves are all full crusty. It's a good thing we did this. Let head gasket off of there. So this combustion chamber has an awful lot of carbon buildup in it, okay? So you can see that kind of gritty, crusty stuff there. It's all black and carboned up on the underside of the head. So it's probably a good thing we did this, because although the engine probably would have ran just fine, it would not have been very healthy, okay? So all right, let me get a rag, clean up the inside of this cylinder wall. Okay, we've got some vertical scarring on the inside of the cylinder wall. Couple of decent ones. Let me bring you in here and show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so you can see these vertical scars right here inside that cylinder wall, and if you run your finger along them, they catch. Okay, so that could be part of the problem why we have low compression, because there are rings around that piston, and those rings are what contain compression on the top side of this piston. So if there are scarring along the cylinder wall, then that leaves gaps around those piston rings and allows compression to escape. Now, another thing could be these valves. As we rotate this engine around, you can see so that this exhaust valve comes up, the piston will come up, exhaust valve will close, intake valve opens, piston comes back up. So right here is what would be called top dead center. Okay, the piston is at the very top of the compression stroke. Both valves are closed. So what happens is, if we back this up a little bit, so the piston comes down, the intake valve opens. When that intake valve opens, the force of the piston moving down draws air and fuel mix from the carburetor straight through the intake port into this valve journal. So that suction of the air coming through is what draws the air and the fuel on top of this piston. So it moves around. Nope, I lied. So now that intake valve closes, that piston comes up, compressing that air and fuel mixture. When it gets to up here, that's when the spark plug fires. The fire happens, forces the piston back down, and then the exhaust valve opens up. So when the piston comes back up, it pushes all of that the exhaust from the combustion through this journal and out through the muffler. Okay? So these valves have a seat underneath here, and if those valves are not seating properly, then that can be a cause of the combustion loss or the compression loss as well. So let me get to a point where we can start tearing some of this stuff apart, and I'll bring you back in. All right, so let's get this flywheel pulled off first thing. So what we got to do is take this coil off, and there are 2 bolts that hold that coil on. This heat shield will come off with it as well. So let's... Well, it looks like this is going to be a points and condenser type ignition system, which actually was kind of phased out late 70s, early 80s. This engine is a 83 model. So clearly they were still putting on their stuff up until that point. So how we get this starter clutch off is it has to come off in this direction. Now they make a special tool to take this off with that I don't have, naturally. So what I'm going to do is put something in these fins to kind of jam this from turning, and then I'll get a pair of channel locks and see if I can break this loose. If not, I'll have to get on one of these lobes down here and see if I can drive it off with a hammer. But alright, so let's try that. These are a little bit bigger. Trying to be careful because I don't want to break that tab off, but it's a good leverage point. So let's try and see what we can do here. There it goes. Well, I got it broke free, but it's still wanting to be a pain. Let me get this pulled off here, and then I'll bring you guys back in. Okay, the next thing we need to do is get this flywheel pulled off. So how we do that is you get back behind it with a pry bar and just kind of gently pry up against the engine block, between the block and the flywheel itself. And then you're going to take a hammer and lightly tap the end of this crankshaft. Now, be very careful, because if you hit this too hard and you start to gall this end up, that starter clutch will not go back on. So just lightly tap it until it gives up. Then you can pull that flywheel off. Now, this flywheel is keyed. There's a Woodruff key. It goes on the inside of this flywheel that's keyed to this right here, so that that flywheel turns in time with the crankshaft. That is important because of this magneto area. As it comes around and it gets underneath that coil, that's what tells the coil to send fire to the piston. So it's important that those things stay in time. So I'm going to set this off to the side with the key on it so that we don't lose any of that stuff. Now, we pull this cover off here. That will give us access to the points for the ignition system. Let's see. Yep, that's the right size. Alright, so here are the points. So as this crankshaft spins around, you can see how right there this little arm is moving up and down. Let's go back the other way. That is what gives the system signal to tell the spark plug to fire. So all right, now let's pull this side cover off here for the valves. The valve cover, I guess, is what you call it. There is a gasket on there, but we have a gasket kit, so there's a replacement gasket for that. So we'll trash that. Check the integrity of these rubber grommets right here, because if those are leaking, then that means your fuel pump is not working, not as efficiently as it should be anyway. Set that off to the side. Get a good look in there. So these valves run all the way down through this journal, through here, and down to the bottom. Those are your valve springs right there. Okay, so I got both valves pulled out. So both valves have this spring, and there's a keeper on the bottom side that latches right into this little notch on the bottom side of the valve stem. So those valve springs are in here, and that valve stem sits right on top. If you can see that little knob right in front of my finger, that's the top side of the lifter, or the tappet. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get into this side cover here. We'll pull these bolts off, pull that side cover off, and that will expose the rotating assembly in here. So you'll have the crankshaft here, and then the camshaft here. Camshaft, the lobes on the camshaft are what spin around and push these lifters up, which is what push the valves up when they need to in a certain time. So if you can look, there's an awful lot of carbon buildup around these valve faces, okay? So we're going to get every bit of this cleaned up. I'll bet you, now the intake valve doesn't look, I mean, it's carboned up around it, but the seat itself looks really good, and it's good and polished. And if you look at the mating surface for the intake valve, of course you can see the paint pen that I've put on it, but that shiny ribbon around there is the actual where it seats up against it, and that looks really good. The exhaust valve, on the other hand, doesn't look that hot. So I'd imagine an awful lot of our compression loss was coming from this valve not seating properly. So we take all these bolts off here, we'll pull this side cover off, and I'll get you back in here. All right, so now we got this side cover off. We can reach in here, pull out the camshaft. Those lifters fall out, obviously. So these are the tappets. The very top of these things are what contact the valve stem and move the valves up and down. This is your governor gear right here. And then this is your crankshaft. So now that we've got all of this disassembled, this crankshaft should just pull. Nope, never mind. I'm an idiot. So you got to disconnect the connecting rod from the piston. Once you pull that rod off, so here's the bottom of the piston. There's the bottom of the piston rod. And then here is the connector on either side. It's a two-piece kind of a U-shaped system that goes around this journal here. So if we bring this on around, you can now access both of those bolts. Now, these are bent down, these tabs are bent down a little bit to prevent those from backing out, because if those back out, that's a big problem when this thing is running. So let me get those bent back up, and I'll pull that cap off the bottom side of it. We'll pull the piston out and get this thing completely disassembled. All right, so we got the piston out. The piston actually looks really good. I don't see any major issues with the piston itself. You can see a little bit of scarring on the side, but it's just cosmetic because it doesn't catch your fingers when you rotate it around. The top side of the piston has a little bit of scorching on it, which is to be expected because that's the side of the piston that is toward the valves. So that's going to be as the exhaust is leaving, that would be why that's happening. So the camshaft looks pretty good overall. Not an awful lot of wear to it. I don't see any major issues with the camshaft at all. All of the teeth on it look good. They're not chewed up or broke off or anything like that. The camshaft looks good. The crankshaft also looks to be just fine, except for this one spot right here. And all that tells me is that this engine got hot at one point, because you can see on the end of that gear there where it's the black just at the very tips, and then you've got that black mark right there on the crank itself. That just tells me that this engine got hot at some point, but no permanent damage was done to it. It seems to be all in good shape. So what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time getting this cleaned up. And we'll probably start the second video as we are reassembling. How we clean these parts up, how we reassemble this whole thing back together. That'll probably be the second video. So thanks for tuning in to us again. Keep checking back often, because there will be more videos posted periodically. I wish I could do it more regularly, but it's just not really in the cards right now. So check back often with us. If you would like, share, and subscribe, please subscribe to the channel. We have an awful lot of views on the channel, and 98% of them are from unsubscribed viewers. So if you would, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your time. If you need to get in touch with us, you can call us at the shop. It's 918-443-9393. You can reach us by email. It's mustangmowers41@gmail.com. And you can reach us online at mustangmowersulaga.com. Thanks, guys.